Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of Government Matters. My name is Mike Dobbs, and we have a special edition today. It's going to be about an hour long, and it continues our discussion that we've had previous this year about the housing crisis in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And today we are joined by a full, big information stuff panel. To my right is Keith Fairey, who you've met before. He is the president and CEO of Wayfinders. On the other table here, we have Brooke Thompson. She's the president and CEO of the Associated Industries of Massachusetts. Sitting next to her is Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities, Edward Augustus. And then last but not least, Rick Sullivan, who is president and CEO of the Western Massachusetts Economic Development Council. And number one, as a Western Massachusetts guy, I want to really thank the Secretary for coming out here, because we don't really always get people of your stature to come out and talk to us about issues, but we really appreciate it today. And in fact, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, you are the first housing secretary, designated housing secretary in 30 years in the Commonwealth. So does this reflect Governor Healey's commitment to the housing issue?
It does, and it's a reflection of a campaign promise that she made that was kept. Right after she came into office, she filed the legislation necessary to stand up the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and I was honored to be asked to serve in this new role.
Now, you were town manager of Worcester, correct?
For 8.5 years, city manager.
And I'm sure Worcester has some of the same housing concerns that the greater Springfield area has. While you were town manager, or city manager, I should say, what were some of the things that you were learning about the housing issues that were affecting people?
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities between Springfield and Worcester, both gateway cities, both with great storied histories and presence, trying to figure out how to reinvent ourselves for the new knowledge-based economy and new ways of working. And one of the strategies we used in Worcester to do that was housing. We did a lot of housing construction. We took advantage of the rail connections between Worcester and Boston. As folks were being priced out of the greater Boston area, I think it was a big benefit to Worcester that we were building aggressively, because we gave folks an option to have an urban lifestyle, to have access to restaurants and cultural offerings, but also have relative affordability compared to what they were dealing with in the Boston area. So between 2010 and 2020, Worcester saw a 14% increase in our population. So we were increasingly keeping students who were graduating from our colleges and universities in Worcester, as well as attracting people who were looking for what we had to offer as a community and the affordability.
Okay, well, as promised, I want to start off with you walking us through the various housing initiatives that Governor Healey has brought forth. In particular, whenever we talk about housing initiatives, the question is, who is this for? Is it for the middle class? Is it for working housing? Is it for affordable housing? So please fill us in on what Governor Healey would like to see happen.
First, I think we look back to this past summer. The governor signed a $1 billion tax relief bill, and there were two critical housing elements to that bill. One is increasing the HDIP tax credit. That really is designed to incent market rate housing production in our gateway cities. That had been $10 million a year. It's now $30 million a year, so tripled. With a one-time $57 million allocation to really deal with a backlog of projects that were waiting for access to those tax credits. Springfield has taken good advantage of that previously, and with this more robust funding, we're going to be able to say yes to more market rate projects in places like Springfield that are gateway cities. Secondly, the LIHTC, or the low-income housing tax credits, that's really the workhorse of affordable housing production, and that went from $40 million a year to $60 million a year. So another significant increase. So that's work done, and we're already putting those two tools to good use. And then back in October, the governor filed the Affordable Homes Act, and the Affordable Homes Act is, I think, without a doubt, the biggest housing bill in the history of the Commonwealth. It's $4.1 billion worth of recommended funding for everything from the Affordable Housing Trust, the Housing Stabilization Trust, capital repairs to our public housing. Massachusetts is the only state that has 43,000 units of state-owned public housing, as well as some new programs, some innovative programs, one of which is an innovation fund, $200 million. That's really designed to help, convert commercial properties that may no longer have a commercial use, but still have an opportunity to serve the communities that they're in by being converted to housing. We know that's happened for years with old mills. Old mills were an important part of our commercial industrial base. Many of those have been converted to housing. We think there's similar opportunity with office and retail old malls that similarly can be kind of repositioned and meet the housing needs in the community. So we have funding to do that. And then there's 28 policy recommendations that are attached to that. Things like ADUs, accessory dwelling units as of right. The ability, if you have a garage, to maybe add a unit above the garage, a basement or attic that could be converted to a one-bedroom or studio apartment. We think 8,000 to 10,000 units of housing can be created in 5 years at no cost to the Commonwealth. Private property owners would decide to do this if it made sense for them. And it would allow people often who want to downsize. Maybe they're an elderly person living in a 3-bedroom house that they no longer need, but there's nowhere to move to in their community. They would be able to move, free that house up for a growing family that needs that kind of space. So we think that the combination of those tax credits as well as the funding and the policy changes in the Affordable Homes Act are really the combination that's going to unlock housing production in Massachusetts and really make sure that we're creating all kinds of housing, market rate housing, ownership opportunities, affordable rental, deeply discounted rental, and our public housing stock, which is really our safety net system here in Massachusetts.
That is a lot of things, a lot of programs at various different levels. Who do you see as the people who are going to be leading these efforts in the communities? Are we talking about select boards? Are we talking about mayors? Are they going to be the spark plug to get some of this stuff going?
It's really going to be a combination of folks. Sometimes it's going to be developers who are taking advantage of these programs. They put together a project, usually working closely with the local community, finding land, assembling land for a project, designing it, and then coming to us, and depending on what it is and who it serves, there's an array of subsidies, programs that we can put into that. And that usually buys some affordability, some amount of units that are discounted from what the market rate is to make sure that, entry-level firefighter, the DPW worker, the preschool teacher can live in these units as well as anyone else. It really is important. We're seeing this a lot around the state where, that workforce housing, folks are having to move further and further away from their jobs or having to make not good decisions for them and their family and our employers, saying, hey, I can't work here anymore because I can't find anywhere affordable to live near this location. And that's a threat to our competitiveness as a state, to our viability of our communities. That's our property tax base. And so we need to make sure that people at every level of the income spectrum can live in the communities that we are looking for them to be working in.
Is our situation in Massachusetts unique to the New England states? Are other states having similar issues about developing housing?
There's a housing crisis across the country. There's an affordability crisis around the country. I think we're a little more acute here in Massachusetts. honestly, we have not been building enough housing in the last 20 or 30 years. Some of it has to do with, local communities have gotten very creative, and this is probably more so in the greater Boston area, deciding that they don't want certain types of housing in their communities and put up roadblocks or zone in a way that really kind of limits whether it's family housing or more dense housing. And we need to really be working on removing those barriers. That's what the MBTA Communities Act is about, that you probably hear a lot about, removing some of those local barriers so that we can, really do the kind of production that the economy demands and that our future growth as a state demands.
In fact, Keith, you sent us a slide, which I think would be appropriate, that talks about the age of the housing in our area. And essentially, when you look at it, and the viewers will be seeing it here in a moment, we have a very old housing stock here, don't we?
We do. We have a housing stock, much of it built before 1970 and a significant amount built before 1950. That means it needs reinvestment. That's single-family homes, that's multifamily units, 3 to 4 family homes, and that's apartment buildings as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to reinvest in the existing housing stock, and if we don't reinvest, the issue that happens there is that we begin to lose that. Some of that housing stock goes into functional obsolescence. So the Secretary was talking about the need to invest in more production, but if we kind of are running, kind of producing on one end, but letting housing units go into functional obsolescence, that's we're kind of treading water and not really making progress. So there's a great opportunity, especially as we look in our older cities like Springfield, Holyoke, Westfield. Any of these cities have great needs for reinvestment to keep people in their homes and to keep, in some cases, in the case of public housing, a huge public investment already made by the Commonwealth, keeping that vibrant and vital for the tenants who live there, who are some of the most vulnerable people in the Commonwealth.
Well, I'm just taking a look at this, and the communities that have the most post-1970 housing, the community that has the most is Belchertown, followed by Southwick, Amherst, Agawam, Ludlow, East Longmeadow, which sort of points out the concept that there's a certain element of white flight here. There's a certain element of developers saying we don't want to build houses in a gateway city like Springfield, Chicopee, Holyoke. We want to build them in the suburbs. And I understand that's their right to do so, but it does affect the housing stock of these cities.
It does, and it also reflects a huge economic change that happened during that period from 1970 forward. Really, the loss of agricultural land in all those communities, right? That was converted to housing. Belchertown is a huge example of this. Hence, their 76% of the huge growth in their housing stock during that period. But when you look at it overall, even that housing, 1970 housing, needs reinvestment today, right? I was born in 1970. That's 54 years ago. So I need a little reinvestment, and that housing stock needs reinvestment too. And the challenge today is that it costs more now than ever to do that reinvestment. Whether you're a homeowner and trying to figure out how to reinvest, and you look and say, well, I would like to get a loan, but you look at the interest rates, what they are today, and the cost of construction at the homeowner level. At the, we own many units here in the region, and much of it needs reinvestment. That's affordable housing, and our units require reinvestment as a multifamily owner, and some of it we've reinvested in more than once. But as we all know, in order to keep it in good condition and keep it serving the community the way it needs to, you need to invest.
The State House News Service did a story recently talking about the new median sale price of a house in Massachusetts. February, it was $498,369. The concept that we used to have 40 years ago was, you buy a starter home, something that an individual or a couple could afford, in the hopes that then when you have families, you can get larger. Starter homes are at $498,000. That's $500,000. So, and first I'll ask the Secretary, then I want Rick and Brooke to talk about this. How is this affecting our economy then when you have that kind of benchmark for a sale of a house, price of a house?
Well, I think we're losing folks who want to own a home, know the benefits of owning a home, the ability to acquire equity over time and ultimately pass that on intergenerationally and all the good things that come with that. When folks go to these open houses and they put in offers and the place goes for over asking, 5 times and 10 times, after a while, people start saying to themselves, well, I guess home ownership isn't possible in Massachusetts. I've got to think about going somewhere else if I want to own a home. And we are losing those people. And if you think about those are the folks that often are just coming out of college, they're just starting their careers, starting their families. We've invested a lot as a state in them, in their K-12 education, the higher education, and then we're exporting them to other states. I'd suggest that's a very dumb public policy. And what we need to do is align our resources and our focus and our attention to make sure we have a smarter public policy which says, hey, stay here, start sharing all of that knowledge, all of those skills, give back to the Commonwealth that has been good to you, and make your life here, make your career here, raise your family here. But it's got to be a reasonable cost to do that, and that's why we have to do more production.
So with more production of different kinds of housing for folks, the greater the opportunity is to see those costs lower then.
I think it's a basic supply-demand issue. If you have very few, items that are in strong demand, then all the power goes to whoever has those items. And if you're a renter or a first-time home buyer, you can't say, well, I'm going to take my business down the street. There is nowhere down the street to take it to. And what we have to do is kind of restore that power dynamic so that the consumer has a little power and says, if you're asking for a crazy rent, I've got other options, and you might adjust your rent accordingly. But that's why we need a little bit more supply.
So from the business side, I'll go with you first, Brooke. From the business side, how is this affecting the businesses that are here, their efforts to recruit, their efforts to retain? How are you feeling the housing crisis on the business side?
It's having a real impact. So at AIM, we do poll our members regularly across the state and say, tell us what your biggest challenges are. And for the last 4 years, it has been hiring. And so even though you have an unemployment rate that is excessively low, 2.9%, I think, last month, you're still having between 15 and 20% of our employers here in Massachusetts saying, I have open positions. And honestly, when I sit down with them, they say it's probably higher than that. If I had a real choice of talent, it would be greater. And so it's having a real impact. My story is not dissimilar from what we have all talked about. I grew up in the Midwest. I came out here to Western Mass to go to college. I fell in love with it. Before I came out, I thought, I'll go out for 4 years, I'll go back. Loved it, stayed out here to go to graduate school, eventually found a job, got a home, have children in the public schools. I'm here to stay, right? That is the story that we need to continue. But I will say, it was sticker shock 20 years ago when I was looking. I can't imagine what our 22, 23, 24-year-olds who are looking to buy their first home are facing. And so there's continued, as the Secretary said, on top of that, competition from other states. Mm-hmm. And in the post-COVID world, where things have changed about where you can live and where you can work, that competition is even greater. So we really have to take some aggressive steps now if we're going to right-size where we're going in the future.
Yeah, so in Western Mass, it's not that much different. So my 97 members of the EDC would, if they could hire tomorrow, there's literally thousands of positions that are open in every single sector. It doesn't matter which sector you're talking about. So the opportunities that I think the administration has laid out here and properly funded across the board for all of these is at least kind of an all-in to be able to have a growth strategy. And there's probably no part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts right now that needs a growth strategy more than Western Massachusetts, because we just need to be able to attract those workers to come here. But we need places for them to live and to be able to afford to live. I mean, it's all part of the package. We got a great quality of life, but if we don't have a place for them to be and to live, then it's really kind of all for naught. And so you see this problem on a number of fronts. One is the cost of housing. So I think a lot of the programs address that from the administration with some of the incentives. It's actually getting it produced. So you had actually, Mike, asked the question, what's going to be the spark or the spark plug that's going to drive this? I think it's everybody. It's not just the developers, but you certainly need the developers to come forward. But you need the leadership in the individual cities and towns to adopt and push forward this growth strategy and this growth opportunity. Quite frankly, I've been around here for probably well over 3 to pushing 4 decades, and this is the first time that there's really been the support from the state level to be able to provide that, and it is across the board. And the business community has a role here too, so that when the developer is in front of the planning boards or the ZBAs or the city councils, whoever the permitting authorities are, is we need to balance the room to say that this is an important strategy here so that the communities can move forward with the housing opportunities. And again, I mean, I think the strategies that have been put forward is, as indicated, it's really across the board. And there's no inventory. So that first-time home buyer has no chance in many cases, not even out here in Western Massachusetts, to get that first home, because they're going to always be outbid by the cash offer or somebody that's going to bid more than they're going to be able to afford. And it's going to be two problems with that. One is people are staying in their homes longer because they'd like to. They would move, they would cash out the equity in their home, they would reinvest those dollars into the community, but they also want to stay in the community, and there's no place for them to go. So you need some housing on that end so that people are going to step up and say, hey, I'll sell, I'll kind of cash out my equity, and I'm going to go get a smaller place over here that I can manage, whether that's an accessory dwelling unit or something else. But they need those options. Those need to be built. And then that will open up other opportunities for people to be able to move in. So it does need to be across the board. I think these policies do that, but it's really incumbent on everybody, not just the political leaders, but the business leaders and the developers to step up and take advantage of this moment in time, because the numbers are staggering. And what's happening is the younger people are just becoming frustrated and they're leaving, right. And that just is compounding the workforce problem that we already have.
Yeah, and just if I could underscore the opportunity for us all in this, and the obligation of us all. As a developer of housing here in Western Massachusetts, we used to say it would take us 3 to 5 years to do a project. Now we say it's more like 5 to 7. And a lot of that is about the local process that we have to go through. The barriers, the resistance. Some of it is positive and good engagement. We can always learn from what communities want better and understand how to adapt our projects. But when you put local barriers in place, no matter how many resources the Commonwealth puts forward, we're not going to get a handle on this crisis. So the $4.1 billion, the whole Affordable Homes Act, is a comprehensive approach to investing at all levels. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take a variety of different programs and incentives to really begin to turn the tide in the right direction here. And in Western Massachusetts, we have 101 cities and towns. So of the 351 in the state, 101 are here. Many of them are supportive of affordable housing, and we work well with them. Others have capacity issues. They don't have planning staff. They're not sure where they want to site housing. And I would say to every community, come up with your housing agenda. What do you want to see happen in your community? Do you want to take advantage of some of the state programs, like the 40R program, which allows you to get incentives for creating affordable housing and zoning for it in your city, in your town centers? There are real opportunities in both in the Affordable Homes Act and across the programs that the Commonwealth has to create the housing that we need for today and for the future, the kind of housing Rick was talking about.
And I will say, to just put a fine point on that, this is the critical time, as Keith and Rick have said. The tools are here by the administration, right? Unlike they have ever been before. But the cities and towns that step up and are willing to do something are going to be the winners, because that's really what it takes. And I will even add on to what Rick said. Everybody who cares about this should show up to a town meeting. The people who show up at those meetings are people who don't want whatever is on the agenda to happen. And so it is incumbent not just on the business community, but all of us as a whole who want to invest and see our communities grow and our economy grow to show up. And it's a vital part of getting this over the finish line.
Mr. Secretary, would there be any benefit to actually standardizing zoning for housing across the Commonwealth? I know that is a dangerous thing for me to ask because people like to have local control, but just what Keith said, because I know Wayfinders, they're doing a development in Agawam, and you've done one in South Hadley. Those are different communities with different standards and different points of view. And certainly the graph that we showed about where the new housing is, I would submit that most of this housing is marketplace, market rate housing. So would there be any benefit to trying to have some sort of standardization?
Well, Mike, I was sitting here thinking to myself, now be careful how you answer this, because you don't want to be the first and the last housing secretary at the same time. I think there should be local control of zoning. However, I do think that with ADUs as of right and with the MBTA Communities Act, there are examples of where the state does sometimes need to weigh in and say, look, for our Commonwealth's benefit, all communities need to be doing something to help with this housing crisis. It cannot be left to the responsibility of just a handful of communities to do this. And, we talk about the town of Milton, which is kind of fighting the implementation of the MBTA Communities Act. The median household price in Milton is $935,000. The people who work in the supermarket in Milton, or the preschool teachers, people we called heroes just a few years ago in the middle of the pandemic, why is it some other community's responsibility to provide the housing for the people who make the town of Milton work? It seems to me if we're a Commonwealth, we all have a responsibility to do our part. And asking for some basic kind of zoning relief to allow these projects to move forward. But you still want to have local control. So the MBTA Communities is a good example of trying to balance that correctly. They get to create the zone. They have to create a zone. It has to be of a certain size. It has to be by a certain date. But what it looks like and how it's shaped and where it is, that's up to the local community. And they can talk about it and debate it and offer alternatives. So I think that's the kind of balance that you want to strike.
Rick, do you think that people in Western Massachusetts are willing to think about this? Just what the Secretary said, with these tools available to develop housing?
So I would tell everybody that they need to consider it. Because again, I think that we need to be able to grow. We need, whether it's politically, we've seen our legislative delegations shrink because of size. We've seen our impact on the economy shrink somewhat because of the size. So, part of that is growth. So the only way that you're going to move forward and survive into the future is to have a growth strategy. And so therefore, I think that it is incumbent on every single community, whether they're a gateway city or they're a town, to be thinking about this and do just as the Secretary said, determine where you want it in your community, and it needs to be of a certain size. And I'll go a little bit further than probably the Secretary's comfortable with. The state has a series of certainly carrots, which are part of the program, but they also have some sticks on the other side that they can also begin to deploy. And I think that they need to look at some of those. So grant programs, for instance. I mean, you're dealing with the MBTA communities, which really does not impact anybody out here in Western Massachusetts. But we have gateway cities. So if the next phase of this program at the state level is requiring MBTA communities to create their housing plans, then maybe the gateway cities also need to start putting together their plans. Or, the towns that are part of regional school systems, or other smaller communities that are receiving subsidies or receiving grant programs. In order to be able to qualify for that, you have to have a housing plan in place. So you still get to control that, which is jealously guarded by every single community, absolutely, and probably realistically realistically, that's not going to change. But there are some levers at the state level that they can deploy to kind of force that conversation in the community, if you will, but leave it up to the communities to be able to decide where that happens. But it needs to be of a certain size and needs to be, located, strategically. But that's not the state saying where it has to go or how fast or how much, but each community can still decide. But it's incumbent, I think, from a good public policy point of view in terms of where you want to be in the future, you need to grow. Our schools, have capacity. Those are fixed assets in many cases in all of our communities. They're shrinking. The population of the school size is shrinking. So it's not like we're going to have to build more infrastructure, whether it's educationally or sewer or water or roads. We have the infrastructure to be able to do it because we were bigger, just a little while ago. So I think that, we're not looking to inundate or burden a community with this. It just makes, good sense, I think, from an economic development point of view and a survival point of view. People will always say it's getting too expensive to live. And if you don't grow, then you're just looking to have your municipal expenses and your local expenses, continue to grow. Those are going to grow with inflation as well. And you're just passing that on to just the few people that are left in your community, where at least if you have some growth strategy, those costs, that new growth, if you will, can be figured into your municipal budgets and whatnot, and at least make it more affordable also in the long run for everybody.
Yeah, and we have room to grow, to Rick's point, in terms of all that infrastructure you talked about. But if you just look at the gateway cities in our region, many of them are well below their peak population. And the governor and the secretary mentioned this before about our competitiveness. And one of the things the governor ran on is the loss of population in the state, right? The 2020 census showed us losing about 50,000 people. Well, if you look at the gateway cities just in Western Massachusetts, the ones that are below peak population, if they were to get repopulated again to their peak population numbers, it would be above 60,000 people. So just here, we could refill that just in our gateway cities. And many of our other communities have opportunities to grow as well, to the point Rick's making. And it has a huge ripple effects in the economy if we don't. It's political representation, yes. Healthcare facilities. Other services, the economic actors will vote by moving those resources other places if there is not enough of a consumer base for them. So if we want to create the kind of vibrant communities that we all want to live in, we have to invest in a growth strategy that makes sense for our communities. And our communities need to be part of determining what that is, where that is, how that happens, but it has to happen in a timely manner, and we need to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us now with an administration that has this as its number one priority. And I think the legislature is on board with that priority. And so this is a unique kind of coalescing of interests, of resources, and we all need to step into it.
We have a slide up, which I think is really interesting and certainly disturbing, which speaks to how many people are retiring versus how many people are staying. Brooke, from a business point of view, when you see this kind of information about the potential workforce, does it worry people? Does it concern people? Does it affect decisions about expansion of a business in Massachusetts?
Absolutely, it does. And in a post-COVID world, businesses are making those decisions at an even faster rate than they were before. I'll give, we're on the cusp of the baseball season, so my mantra is if you build it, they will come. And I think we're at a real inflection point because in addition to the tools the Secretary's laid out, the administration also has announced the Massachusetts Leads Act, right? So the economic investments to incent businesses to come here, to grow here, to expand. And I think it's a real opportunity, particularly if you're looking at the loss of population and the available space to come out and say, how do we look at some of these new industries that we're trying to attract to Massachusetts, right? Whether it's the blue economy, the green economy, and look at the advantages we have out here. Look at the space. Look at the manufacturing capabilities, right? But again, if we don't have the housing stock or the affordable housing options to house our workforce, then you're not going to be able to, in a competitive environment, attract those businesses, attract those workforce opportunities throughout the Commonwealth. And that's really where we have to take all of these tools together at this time and say that, again, COVID kind of threw the way things were out the window a little bit, right? And the way in which we're working, the way in which we're making decisions about our life are changing. And so if we don't act now collectively, then we're going to start seeing loss of population, loss of opportunities. And again, I think there's I look at it more as an opportunity than sort of a potential loss, that now is the time that if everyone's on board with putting all of these proposals into practice, that we can attract these new industries that strengthen our already existing fabulous assets, like life sciences, like colleges and universities, and like our healthcare system.
Mr. Secretary, how long have we had this problem? I mean, we've been talking about housing for a number of years, but it would seem to me this is not an overnight event. This is something that has been taking place probably over the last 50 years, I would assume.
It's certainly been decades of underbuilding. And now we're at a point where it's catching up with us, and then you add in the inflationary environment where the cost of construction materials, et cetera, have gone up in recent years. Even though inflation has come down a bit, those prices haven't come down. And then you add to that the interest rate environment, and the housing kind of ecosystem is locked up, if you will. So I think Rick was kind of alluding to this. You've got folks who may want to move. Maybe they want to downsize, or maybe they've got a growing family and they need to get a bigger place. But if you've got a 3% interest rate, you're not anxious to go out there and get a 5 or 6% interest rate. And so the movement that you normally see, I call it life cycle housing, the kind of housing you were looking for just getting out of college with a couple of roommates, is different than when you were getting married, having kids, different than when you're an empty nester and aging in place. And what we need to do is make sure that we have enough supply so that you can do all of those parts of your life here in Massachusetts, and you have the natural kind of flow of things, and you have, going back to my earlier point, options available to you. So you have choice available to you. And so we've got to expedite on the production side. That's removing the local barriers. That's really using the tools that are in the Affordable Homes Act, these new tax credits that have been supercharged, if you will, to really, and you know, making housing a priority. The old line, you know, crisis is a horrible thing to waste. I don't think we're going to waste this housing crisis in Massachusetts. We're going to use it as the catalyst for action. You've got people on every end of the political spectrum, you know, every end of the income spectrum saying this is a crisis, this is a problem. So I think we've built a good kind of momentum behind some of these tools that we need. We just got to get it over the finish line.
And there are cities and towns in our regions that also, not to paint a bleak picture here, they're taking advantage of these opportunities and making way for more housing. You mentioned South Hadley. We're developing a 60-unit project there in South Hadley, mixed income, so it'll be affordable workforce and market rate housing there. It's in a commercial plaza that is overparked and where there used to be another establishment, and we're creating that in housing. So that's creating a new kind of housing in the center of town, right? They created a 40R district, which allowed them to get some zoning incentive payments from the state when we build the affordable units there. So there's some benefit for the town. And then the town kept going after that. And they didn't say, great, we got this one project, 60 units, great, let's pat ourselves on the back. No, they have created a housing production plan that they took through a whole public process. And they say they want to build another 300 units in town, right? And so that's the kind of leadership, that's the kind of engagement that we need to sit right now to be able to take advantage of these opportunities coming forward, that creates the kind of South Hadley that people in South Hadley want. They recognize that their kids can't afford to live there, that that people can't afford to stay there if they're wanting to change the housing types to get some life cycle housing that the Secretary is talking about. So they are seizing the opportunity. And it's not just, you know, kind of suburban towns like South Hadley. It's rural towns like Montague as well, created their own 40R district recently. And so there are signs of progress, and there are signs of great opportunity in our gateway cities as well. And here in Springfield, there's lots of good development going on. There's going to be a significant Commonwealth Builder affordable homeownership project that's nearing completion here in town. It's going to be one of the biggest homeownership projects in our region that's affordable. And those are the kind of things that we need to see. And many communities communities are stepping up and investing alongside the state. This isn't the state just funds all these projects. It's alongside, it's in partnership with, and really creating these better housing opportunities for all of us.
Well, let me ask the group as a whole, is land use and the availability of land to build housing on, is that a problem that we're facing as well? It's interesting to me when I drove up to UMass recently, and I'm shocked at Hadley. I'm shocked because I went to UMass back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, and there were cornfields, there were agricultural fields everywhere, and now, you've got a sprawling commercial district in Hadley, truly sprawling. You have more and more agricultural properties being taken out, which creates a whole nother set of concerns for the Commonwealth. So do we really have the property available to build what we need to build to accomplish the goals that all of you have been talking about need to be accomplished?
So I think it's probably like anything else, it's a balance, right? And certainly the open space and the farmlands and the recreational lands and opportunities that we have specifically in Western Massachusetts are part of our DNA. That's part of our quality of life. That's part of what makes Western Massachusetts attractive. It's one of the things that we use when we're trying to attract people here. So there certainly is that balance. So I don't think anyone is looking for, wholesale takeover of the farmland or the open space to be building housing. But, we've talked a little bit about, reuse of some of the mills. I mean, I look at Ludlow Mills, which is a significant project that West Mass Development has done in a number of different phases. By the way, as soon as they get the units built, they're sold and filled. So you can just see what the demand is for that. But some of it is reuse, and some of it is filling in between where there's already existing projects. I was talking to the secretary earlier about one in Westfield, that there's one that's in between, so it's not creating additional sprawl. It's not taking farmlands or open space off the table. So I think it's a balance, and I think that goes back to where it's incumbent upon the community leadership to determine where they want that housing to be, to preserve the quality of life, to preserve the quality and the integrity of that community. So there are appropriate places, but you have to identify where those are so that when that project comes forward, there will be support for that project, and so that you're not literally having to have a public process and a fight on every single proposal that comes forward. So I do think that you can create that balance, and I don't think anybody is looking, again, to use up all the open space that you have just for housing, because, again, it's an important part of who we are here in Western Massachusetts.
And the Secretary is talking about commercial conversions. We certainly have a great opportunity in many of our cities for that. As Brooke was talking about, the way we work has changed tremendously. So do we need all these square feet of office space? Probably not going into the future, right? So here in Springfield, we have tens of thousands of square feet of vacant office space. We're working on a significant commercial conversion project in Holyoke, where we're vacant office space, old office buildings, beautiful buildings, yes, but we can convert them into housing, right? Keep retail on the bottom floor, bring back people to downtown Holyoke, create a thriving retail base, and really, have the kind of communities that we want. So I think there's, yes, in different communities, there's different opportunities to kind of rethink about and reimagine the space that's there and invest in that, whether that be a rural community or a more suburban one or some of our urban communities.
If I could throw out a real example. Earlier this week, I was in Northampton, and the old Northampton State Hospital has been completely built out. There are 400 units of housing on the site of what had been shuttered for many decades, kind of an eyesore, a problem for the community, a problem for the state, and now has been turned into very kind of mixed development, ownership opportunities, rental opportunities, assisted living. It's transformed an area into a whole new neighborhood in the city. All that land had never been on the tax rolls. It's all on the tax rolls. It's providing homes, good quality homes, diverse homes. Those are the opportunities. And, in our Affordable Homes Act, there is some new language that really streamlines the process of surplusing state properties so that we can move some of these old state assets back onto the tax rolls, helping to facilitate the production of additional housing.
I think no matter how congested we like to think we are in Massachusetts, and there are certainly regions that are, I think this is more of an issue of local will to do something than it is about available space. Because I think, as everyone said, but the Secretary just articulated, we can and we have to think creatively about what housing is, what it looks like going forward. And I also say all the time, as an organization representing employers, that's why it's important to ask all of these groups of folks, what are you looking for? I'm not going to presuppose that at my stage in life with 2 kids in public schools that I know what somebody who's 22 coming out of college or, coming out of a trade school wants when they're looking at housing. We need to involve folks at all areas and all ages in that conversation so we can figure out how we can be nimble and create what they're going to want to see.
The Secretary has spoken about the impact of extending the MBTA to Worcester has had on that city, especially in the light of housing. One thing that struck me when you were talking about that was that you were working on additional housing as concurrently this expansion of rail was coming. So once you had the rail, you did have additional housing for folks. Not to beat a dead horse, but I am going to talk about East-West Rail here and ask you folks about that. In Worcester's case, it's really understandable in terms of the MBTA transporting people to Boston, the eastern part of the state, and to have housing. There have been, and we discussed this a little bit in the last program, talks that if we had the East-West Rail, that it could conceivably have a similar effect. But that's a very long time off, and what all of you have been talking about is more immediate efforts to address these problems. So, Mr. Secretary, do you think if East-West Rail was a reality, do you think that actually would help us in terms of housing?
Well, I do. I like to call it West-East Rail, but I do think it's a tool, as Brooke and Rick have mentioned. People's work habits are changing. So now maybe you go into the office once or twice a week, and so having the ability to access a more affordable market. You have so many assets here in Western Massachusetts, the arts, the culture, the food scene. There's so many things that would make people want to live here, but if they need to be in the office occasionally or get closer to work, having that public transportation option, I think, is really, critical. We've seen it work in a lot of different places, not only in Massachusetts, but around the country. So having that option, I think, makes a lot of sense, will enhance, but it's not, there's no silver bullet. It's a combination of things. You need to have communities that have safety and amenities and affordability around not only housing but other elements. So you need all those kind of factors. And my sense is Springfield and Western Mass has a lot of the ingredients, but that West-East Rail could be a game changer.
And I think we've been in a mindset for a long time that in Massachusetts, there's one place to work and everybody has to get to that place. And I say, for some folks, right, that's the answer. But I also think looking at, again, and this is the real opportunity that the Affordable Homes Act provides, letting people live closer to where they work helps us in a whole lot of other fronts. It's going to help us on the transportation side. It's going to help us reach our climate goals faster, right? It's going to help us on the affordability side. So I do think we have to look at, for some folks who need to travel, they need more options. They need to have that flexibility to get where they need to get, whether they're coming west-east or east-west. But I also think looking at getting away from this mindset that we all work in one place and then we spread out when we're talking about living, and live closer to where we work is going to help us in a variety of fronts as well, that again is going to make Massachusetts more attractive long term.
Well, one thing that Keith talked about in our previous program was the importance of the regional transit authorities. So, for instance, if you found a great house in Greenfield, but you were working in Northampton, would it be great to have an RTA that could transport you down without you driving a car, and it would be easy. Just wondering if when you think about housing, and obviously you're thinking about transportation, do those two things go together in terms of developing regional transit authorities and their reach within communities and housing?
So I'd actually go even add one more step to that. The short answer to your question is absolutely, because people need to be connected and be able to get from one place to the other reasonably, which is why West-East Rail, any connection is a good thing. I'm a political realist. I don't think that happens anytime soon. As somebody that worked on the South Coast Rail, which still isn't built, that's been promised for, literally administration after administration. So that's a ways off. So I don't think we can wait for that to happen. And, just was in a meeting yesterday with the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, where the Transit Authority Director, Sandra, came in and said, they've been level funded for next year. So they're looking at how do we make that budget work? So what are we going to cut back on because of inflation and everything else? So it's getting less and less. What I would also add in is that with the economy and the jobs that are being created into the future, many of those are going to be remote, working from home, telecommuting. So number one, maybe the transit authority is going to look very different. Maybe it's more Uber-like than it is running a big bus from community to community. And particularly out here, maybe it's vans or maybe it's one-offs, and again, it's more Uber-like. But in order to make that work, you have to have a really good connection to broadband and the internet and then Wi-Fi. So, probably the single biggest, infrastructure investment that could be made in Western Massachusetts, and I think the Patrick administration and the Baker administration and now the Healy administration are recognizing it and have been making very good investment in it, is building out the broadband capacity and the Wi-Fi capacity in our communities so that we can take advantage of this technology, so that we can create the housing so that people can work from home. So they need a home, but they also need to be able to have access to be able to work from home. So we need to build out robustly, and not just in the rural communities, but there are parts of our cities that don't have, the right amount of connection. So that whole digital divide, equity divide that's there, that needs to be improved as well. So that's a very strategic, significant investment that I think can be made at all levels, so that we can take advantage of connecting people up. But absolutely, people need to be able to be connected to their job, whatever that connection looks like.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask a question, Mike. Can I do that? I was going to ask the secretary to talk about the collaboration among the secretariats around things like that. Brooke was talking about the Mass Leads Act, and you have the Affordable Homes Act, and we've had the Transportation Secretary out recently. Brooke's organizing to talk to us about transportation opportunities here. And when I asked Secretary Tibbetts-Brooke about that, and she was talking about that you all connect, that you all talk about these things, about how to leverage each other. And I just wanted you to articulate your experience with that.
Sure.
And where you think the opportunity is.
She and I actually have regular standing meeting where we kind of bird dog projects and opportunities. I had been in Lowell not too long ago, and there's some change of where they would load on the commuter rail there that would open up some parcels next to where the city owned that could build more housing that literally, is exactly what you're talking about when you talk about smart growth, right next to the train station, where you could walk out the lobby of your building and jump on a train wherever you need to go. So we really do get to the granular level and talk about this parcel in this community that, needs a tweak from a transportation point of view about where you load or where you park, but then opens up housing development opportunities. At the end of the day, that's really what the MBTA Communities Act is about, saying, hey, we've got this investment in public transportation, in these communities or close to these communities. We want you to create housing opportunities, more dense housing opportunities, close, proximate to those locations. And it goes to Brooke's point about our climate goals. That's the only way we're really going to ultimately get to our climate goals. If we get people out of the cars, it improves the quality of their life, it improves the environment, and so there's a natural synergy there, and we work very closely together.
Well, I want to sort of wrap things up by doing something, by asking a question that is of a real immediate concern. One aspect about housing that we're hearing more and more about is emergency sheltering, especially for this growing migrant population that we're seeing coming to Massachusetts. I'm not sure if that falls under your supervision, but I was wondering, does any part of the housing initiatives that the governor has set forth that we've been talking about, does that also cover emergency sheltering and housing for a migrant population?
It does fall under my secretariat, and I would say we've got a system that's got 7,500 families right now. That's capped at 7,500. About 55% of those are longtime Massachusetts families. So we talk a lot about it as a migrant crisis, and certainly we've seen a huge influx of folks, particularly from Haiti, less so from Venezuela, that really added to the numbers. But still, a majority of the folks in that system are Massachusetts families who are victims of sometimes domestic violence, sometimes just the loss of affordable housing in their communities, and there's nowhere they can afford to go. They may have several children. So I'm proud to live in a state that doesn't leave children, pregnant moms on the street. That being said, it's been a challenge to take this many families in with very different types of needs. So the governor has been very focused on trying to get work authorizations for the folks. And I should remind or use this opportunity to let folks know, all of these migrants are here legally. They're allowed in a parolee status. So they're not undocumented, they're not illegal. I don't like that term. They're all legally here. I've seen now that we've had a number of months and put some work authorization clinics in place, getting some traction. We're starting to see folks get jobs. I was in Salem recently. The whole third shift at Salem Hospital, their housekeeping department, they were struggling to fill those jobs. They're now all filled with Haitian migrants who have work authorization. They're working, taking care of the patients, taking care of the hospital rooms, filling a big need in that community. And it's good for those families. They're going to ultimately be able to move out of shelter and into homes themselves. They're meeting a workforce need. And I do think it's an opportunity in places that we're looking to grow population and meet those workforce needs. So if we're smart about it, and I think we are, taking a lot to get there, but this could be a real opportunity for Massachusetts.
And I just want to quickly add, as a shelter provider as well, and an administrator of several other programs to help people get into housing, the administration has extraordinary resources available right now to help people, Massachusetts residents, migrants, get into more stable situations. And so the kind of the leaning in of the governor and the secretary and their teams, along with providers in the community like us, has been exceptional over the last several months, and we're starting to see traction. It's hard in this housing market to rehouse anybody, as we were talking about. We've got historically low vacancy rates and other things, but some of these resources that are available to landlords, and I'm talking to you landlords, I'm looking in the camera right now, talking to landlords, there are opportunities here, right, where we can bring forward somebody who is going to get support from us through a program, is going to get support and potentially with a rental voucher, is going to get support. You can get a landlord incentive to help move somebody into your unit. So you're not out there by yourself taking a big risk. We're here to support you. The Commonwealth is here to support you, and there's a real opportunity to provide quality housing, to create new stability for these families who then become economic contributors to our communities.
And there's an opportunity for employers too, because again, we're sitting here seeing all these open positions, right? The administration is working so that these folks can get work authorization. Those are folks that are on the sidelines that could come into the labor market who can fill positions.
And that follows every single population that's ever immigrated here.
Correct.
They've taken the entry-level jobs and worked their way up. So it's the exact same model, but they've got to have that work permit. And the administration has done a really good job on that. We need the feds to be a little more helpful here. But I can tell you, just in Western Massachusetts, we've got a couple of employers that are members of my group that would hire, many of the people that are in the shelters today, but they can't because they don't have the work permit. So the state's been great. They've been able to identify the people that are there that do have work permits. So there's been some movement there. But it's the way immigration has always worked. They've always taken those entry-level jobs when they first come here.
Well, folks, thank you very much for coming by and talking about this. Mr. Secretary, thank you.
No, thank you.
We really appreciate what you guys are doing. And I think we're going to have another program about housing in the future. And so we will continue covering this particular issue. I thank you very much for watching this edition of Government Matters and right here on FOCUS Springfield.